And for this third conversation, which is not the last one today, but the third one in this session, I hand over the moderation to Simon from the ICO. Thank you.
Thank you, Achim. Now, I've moved to the front, so I thought make sure I can see everyone that asks a question, because I know when I was sitting over to the one side, there were some hands going up at the corner there that I didn't quite see, so I'll make sure we try and get everyone. Now, we've got, by my watch, just over 30 minutes until we get to the end of the timetabled session. I suggest we try and keep to that to finish at 4 o'clock to talk about conclusions and where to go from here, because that's probably the most important session of the day to try and answer some of the questions we've raised. And I guess the topic for this third conversation, the real-life conditions, I think we kind of approached some of those ideas on the end of that previous conversation. So I guess if we think about, again, Frank's diagram that was up there, or something similar you might have seen in another organization, what is it that attacks those arrows to stop privacy going through a product lifecycle? Or does it never start, perhaps from the beginning? And I tried to think of some reasons as to why privacy might not be embedded in a real-life project, whether that be budgets, convenience, the user experience guys come along and say, no, we couldn't possibly give users a choice, or complexity, is it too difficult? So I guess if we hand over to George.
I'll keep it brief because I've been talking a lot anyway today, and you kind of by now get the idea of what I'm trying to say. So in my previous life, before I was a full-time academic, I spent some time at Microsoft Research, where I had the pleasure to be the privacy champion. So I indeed witnessed and was a part, I guess, of quite high-quality processes when it comes to engineering, to embed some privacy values into the organization. And at the end of the day, I concur with others that throughout the day said, look, there is nothing really magic about privacy in comparison with any other property. You can just take it as a requirement, turn it into a technical requirement, put in the specification, validate it like you do anything else. So to some extent, what I think at least is that there has been a lack of will or a lack of prioritization, and this is why we're seeing the kind of disasters we're seeing today, and we don't just see poor quality, we actually see disastrous quality. So I'm actually quite hopeful that if there are the right pressures, and the right pressures are both about engineers shaming each other if they don't do their job right, as well as regulators shaming engineers in the special ways regulators can, then we can actually do better than this. And I think that now we have to look forward. To some extent, this event is a historic opportunity, and I don't say that lightly. I have been hanging out with engineers fascinated about privacy, peer-to-peer, crazy ideas for, maybe 15 years. I can see some around the room with me. During those 15 years, we have had a very light interaction with data protection authorities. Marit being one of the people who we knew as the face of data protection authorities. A big question mark in our minds has always been, where are these people that are meant to be taking care of these problems that we care technically about? So I am actually absolutely delighted to be in a room where I can see people on one side clearly being engineers, in that they were jeans, and on the other side clearly being data protection officials, in that they're not wearing jeans, and some. This is a unique opportunity, both because politically clearly now it's clear there is a need, and we have brought those two sides together. So as I said before, my vision of the future is that we are not forcing data protection employees to become privacy-enhancing technologies researchers. That is not their role. We're not forcing privacy-enhancing technologies researchers or engineers in security to become lawyers or legal experts or even policy experts. We are trying to actually do what the confluence of the two can do, which is to really decide where can policy really produce a virtual cycle for technology, and where can technology support policy. And if we can do that in the next 20 minutes, that would be great. So that's a very good point, because I heard from many sides this angst that there are so few of us because very applications, and I'm just taking an example like WhatsApp, is widely popular. So is Facebook, so is Gmail. These applications are engineered by tens of people, not thousands of people. Europe has a lot of countries, luckily, and if the audit making sure that these companies are doing a good job.
Okay, Stéphane, from you, and then we'll back up to the floor.
For data protection, just one is you need to pass 76 days per year to inform user. You have to put everything on the privacy policy. That's also the data or privacy policy. On Google, no innovation in information. Just when you look at in privacy policy for any actors, it's the same when you go. So how can we solve that? How can we'll be able to? If you can go to our website, it's got a website. Well, analyze policy, not just privacy policy, because it's also look at, for example, picture policy, all of right policy, but it's really to give a note, a global note to a website to give them a quite good or bad. And I think it's, of course, it's not the complete solution, but I think it's interesting about information. The second one is a question about consent, because we only always speak about consent. How to consent when you use Google? You've got a lot of services. You've got more than 60 services. How will you able to consent if you just use, for example, free services of 60 services of Google? For that, please take a look to the Working Party sent a letter to Google to explain how to comply to the European data protection law. And please look at some proposals, for example, is to make a privacy dashboard and a personal dashboard which can respond to, for example, one user just use free service. Google is able to know that, so it will just present to you free control to consent or to be opposed. But maybe it's a solution. And when Google is able to personalize your search, I think Google is able to personalize your consent and personalize your consent because which service you are using. And the last thing I think it's the most important thing, it's users. Because a lot of time users explain to us that they don't care about privacy. And it's really difficult for the data protection authority to go to company to explain, please do a better privacy, but the users say, we don't care about. And it's really interesting because I think Facebook or pictures that are sent to internet are the best story to explain to users what is privacy. In France, I think one year ago, there is a bug, a Facebook bug, which is some private message was potentially leaked, and everyone can saw it. After analyze it, we see it's not a bug, it's just a modification of the privacy policy since 5 years. But at this time, all users are able to understand what is the privacy and what is the problem with no privacy. And finally, for the company, for developers, you don't have any return on invest if you choose to do privacy in your application. Why? Because most of users don't care. So that's why we try to work to make easier to do privacy. That's why we, for example, propose code on the website of the CNIL to be able to use Google Analytics and respect the law, because you just have to do a copy-paste and you are able to comply to the law. But I think it's not sufficient, because when some users decide to stop to using a service because there is a problem with privacy, I think company decides really to invest in privacy, because at this time you will have a return on invest with privacy. I will stop here.
Okay, thank you. So any questions from the floor? We've got one? Any more? One, two. Okay, we've got two or three. Oh, okay, right, we'll stop there and we'll start with questions. question?
Yeah, question. It fits very well into this form as well. So what I wanted to raise in this context is the question of innovation, and I think it's been raised before to some extent, and the trade-offs we're facing. There's two areas to be identified where we run the risk of hampering innovation, and I have a very clear opinion to that. I don't think it's a problem. Innovation is not an end in itself, and society has a well-defined right to steer and open certain areas of innovation and to narrow other areas of innovation. And it's been doing that by policy mechanisms all along, and we can very well do that. But we should be aware of where we're opening and where we're closing opportunities. With privacy by design and market steering in this area, there's two aspects, as I said, where we have such effects. One is more related to the previous discussion about the engineering part and top-down, bottom-up models. Of course, if we have high requirements as regards to the processes to be implemented before entering into the market, then that is going to close opportunities for smaller startups, which are important drivers for the dynamic innovation we're currently seeing. As I said, I don't think that's a problem. Maybe we don't want that innovation currently, but I think that's a topic that we should be aware of. The other one more relates to what the colleague from CNIL, I'm sorry, I just forgot your name, just addressed is, of course, we have market drivers, and that's compliance. And we could potentially, with a new regulation, even more, you rule out certain areas and so thus give the market a different drive. And I also think that we should use those opportunities. So if there is references to privacy by design in the regulation, there'll be delegated acts. Sorry for ditching into the law a little bit. There'll be delegated acts referencing eventually IETF, W3C, ISO standards, or standards from the European standards bodies, God forbid. They will have the effect that they require these standards to be addressed and implemented. And that will make it impossible for certain companies to enter the European market or to develop their certain business model. And I also think that's a good thing in some areas, but we also have to be aware.
Okay, if we just collect our other two questions, and then we can look back, get some responses, but also just remind you about the time pressure. So nice, concise questions would be good. Thank you.
Yeah, Robert Onslow from Privacy Builder. I'm also a lawyer, which is why I'm wearing a tie. We've been focusing on privacy. I wanted to take Lena's point a little further forward and ask a question in relation to it, because we've been focusing on privacy and the internet and certifying web frameworks and so on. But I wanted to just look at two other important concepts underlying data protection and just ask a question in relation to those. For example, the right to be forgotten and the principle of minimum data retention. Those, it seems to me, are areas primarily of business concern rather than engineering. And they may have engineering solutions, for example, looking at the database and annotating the schema with items of personal information and then running batch processes to detect breaches and so on. But they are slightly different from what we've discussed to date. And my question is whether or not engineering data protection into, for example, database applications and so on also falls within the terms of reference that we're looking at today. I suspect the answer is yes, but I just wanted to expand the discussion potentially to cover those areas and not just privacy and internet communications, which we've been focusing on.
Okay, thank you. I think do we have one more on the left-hand side?
Thanks. This goes back basically to the discussion we had before the break, but I think it still fits to the constraints for developers. And Rob, you were mentioning the level of qualification that is demanded from developers and said it's only level 2 in the regulation, and I didn't quite understand which regulation that was. And the question, of course, would be, okay, and couldn't there be other regulation to deal with this? And I think that would then nicely fit with demands and constraints for developers.
Well, I was referring to the General Data Protection Regulation, and I made the analogy with the software capability maturity model in which you have 4 levels. And the first level is, well, to basically do your work ad hoc. The second level is to have everything documented in processes. The third level is to make your processes measurable and define performance indicators. And the fourth level will be to have a self-learning feedback loop bringing into your organization processes. So if you map that onto the requirements for basically the data protection engineering maturity model, what I understand as a non-lawyer from the GDPR is that it just requires, in terms of accountability, that you've written down how you run your operations. And it's not going further. So that means you will not hit the third and the fourth level yet. It's not a requirement. But I may misread that envisionment in the GDPR. That's my reading.
Okay, some good questions there. So I guess, Stéphane, should we start? Ask you then, talking about the innovation. You were suggesting you wanted to see innovation in information given to users. So certainly I think that will be hampering any. I know we've certainly seen a lot of, been some recent innovations in sort of privacy policies on the web and privacy centers on some websites, even some videos appearing. Have you got any other comments?
Yes, in fact there is new, a little bit innovation in information, but if you try to compare the innovation in all features in services and the innovation in privacy, we are not in the same world. Because, as I already explained, I think you don't, a company don't have a lot of interest to invest in privacy today. Because it's, because the users, it's not, I say users don't care privacy or data protection because I understood what you say and why you explain the difference, but it's not users don't care about privacy, it's because users don't realize what is the impact for users if you have any problem with privacy. And I think it's the difficulties. That's why I think we have, engineers have to work to offer tools, framework, some things to make easier to include privacy in application. But I think it's not the only thing we have to do, because if data protection authority, association and other people don't try to better explain why we speak about privacy, what we speak about data protection, what we think we need to protect it. What, for example, some people really known see a picture on internet. For example, why Jennifer Watson don't use KeePass, for example, because just they don't know that exists, they don't know how to use it, and they don't see why they need to use it.
So is there a way that we might be able to force them and put those barriers? We've seen that with when you got your router sent to your ISP 5 years ago, it came with open Wi-Fi. Now it comes with WPA, already enabled. Do we need to force those users to move down those steps?
I don't think we need to force, but for example, in the case of Jennifer Watson and the picture that we have all found on the internet, we don't know exactly what is the technical problem. But maybe it's because just those people just let the password, or maybe because they use the same password in different service, and you already have the database of this service that publish on pastebin, for example. So it's really easy to use this password. But Apple will never explain to those users, please careful, because we really care about security. We do a lot of stuff to do good security, but it is always possible that something failed. We cannot attempt for a company to say that. That's why I think it's one of the work of Data Protection Authority is to inform users about what is really the consequences of privacy leak. And as I explained, for example, a lot of fail on Facebook really help Data Protection Authority to pass the message that we need to protect privacy.
Okay, so I guess we can move to the other question. We're talking about privacy by design. Maybe we need to say look at it from the organization's perspective as well. Do they have a need to make sure that their processes are right and delete the data sufficiently quickly enough or are we trying to stop organisations collecting it at all?
Yes, so I would like to pick up both on what Stéphane said and a little bit on the second question of organizations. The first thing, and the reason I'm very keen to come back a little bit into Stéphane's point, is that I don't quite know how to interpret what you said. It's actually quite sophisticated. But to me, there is something that is very clear. You should never blame your users for the terrible things that happen if you give them technology. If you provide me a device with a camera and the opportunity to take photos and transmit them, I will use them to take naked photos of myself and send them to my girlfriend. Why else would I want this device? I would use basically the device, to take photos of my children, to take photos of the intimate moments of my family. This is what cameras are for, right? So then you cannot just say, we should really inform users that they shouldn't be using this thing that they actually spend I'm not saying you said that. I'm not saying you said that. But I'm saying we have to be very clear that if we say this technology is cool, that's what it is cool for. That's the value it provides society, and we need to make it safe for this. Just to clarify, I agree that we spend a long time talking about communication security. And to some extent, and I feel really sorry for particularly our colleagues that are involved in the IETF for picking on that. And the reason I think we pick on that is because the level of maturity of the technology there is actually already quite high. Namely, we know how to do channel security. And this is why we're picking, we as a society, maybe.
I bet that even half of the people in the room wouldn't be able to configure a server.
Right, but at least in theory we believe that this is a kind of tractable problem, and this is why you see my eagerness to see it rolled out, because if we are not able to roll out tractable problems, then once we actually get to the harder problems, such as how do we allow data subjects to have still their data rights respected once their data is in other people's databases, that's a much harder problem, right? I mean, we are not actually that clear on how to do this. So, as I mentioned in my previous life, I was actually taking care of that problem. Ultimately, the databases you would use to store this data have a certain logic to them and have a certain way in which they operate. Currently, they operate not really distinguishing whether what they're storing is personal information or where they are, where it is meteorological readings that don't have data protection rights. They actually, it's not like they don't care, they actually reduce all data they process down to the status of meteorological readings. The default is that the data that is being processed does not actually have any security or privacy or data protection implications, right? And I think that this is why I mentioned earlier today that I believe that there we can help developers be compliant by actually having very targeted actions in partnership with database providers, application framework providers, both web and mobile applications, to actually make sure that these frameworks make it easy to build applications that are compliant. And I think that this is a much harder job than channel security, but I don't think it's impossible. I think we can actually help them do the right thing.
So just curious, I mean, what would be your top one pick for which framework to try and get that done with?
I think it would have used to be Ruby, but now Ruby is not, and Rails is not anymore the hot thing. I would particularly target, in all seriousness, application providers that claim to offer very easy to build cloud-based solutions. Because there is a natural separation in such solutions between actual storage of information and the application logic that makes them particularly amenable to placing controls.
I think Achim, and there's a question in the chat room as well, I think.
Yeah, that's actually me. No, okay, it was a good joke, and that's fine. No, I wanted to, I had been thinking on how to bring a discussion from the chat room into the physical space here, and there was a question, it's actually two issues, two elements. One is an example and the other one is a question. The question is, can any of the companies here in the room mention a product which has been designed according to privacy by design principles and is out in the market. I leave that to come in, and that's exactly the reaction that I was expecting. And the second thing is indicating a case where actually technological development has moved away from privacy protection, and it's referring to RFID ISO standards of 2006, which were, according to this colleague, relatively privacy friendly, but then have been replaced partly or overwritten by the NFC standards, and then the privacy protections have gone away in this observation. So I think those deeper into these protocols may want to respond to these two questions. Thank you.
Any responses for the questions?
Not to respond to the question.
Well, I can only say Tor was developed by privacy by design, so that's probably a perfect solution.
To help people implement the privacy directive, which was definitely designed for privacy by design to hit the principles of the data protection directive and the e-privacy directive. But we didn't use the style because we were a startup, but that was the entire motivation of the product. So.
I guess it's still in beta, and if you didn't get into the beta, keep trying, but Nokia, the new Nokia's first product was Z Launcher, which is an Android app launcher that has a predictive engine in it, and as such, it has moderate or higher privacy impact. And we actually spent a lot of time with the development team, and I was quite impressed. They complained on the first beta release, but now we're on the third beta release or so, and they've actually embraced and a number of features that they've come out with. They come to me and say, look what I've done, that's privacy enhancing on this release. So, we've learned, thankfully, a lot of things from the people who are on the wall of shame in privacy. Not using device IDs, allowing the user to refresh the ID, making sure that there is data retention and deletion built into the solution, following our standard cookie notice and consent privacy design pattern, just a number of things, and some of the things that were mentioned here, securing the data as it goes from the device to the cloud, and making sure that when someone uninstalls the device, the whole sandbox for the app is wiped clean. I mean, a number of things that I think we learned from the GSMA examples of what ought to be done. So, I mean, it's not perfect. I'm sure there are going to be issues that come out on other products, but it does work.
Okay, some good examples. We've got one question which might be the last. If you're quicker than 2 minutes, we might get another question. But
yeah, just to say that the Privacy Builder application is designed to help organizations be EU regulation compliant, and itself, and for fans of recursion and Gödel's theorem, certifies itself as being compliant.
Rob, your earlier question about whether databases should be included in this whole discussion, I think absolutely, along with networks, configuration, proxies, servers, web servers, frameworks, UI frameworks, everything comes in there. If the software gets deployed and uses some of those things, it touches those things, then it's part of what needs to be addressed.
So that should be within the term of reference of what we're looking at?
I think so, definitely.
Okay, we'll go for the last one. Right at the back there.
Yeah, I see some silence in the room. And Hannes actually mentioned that we should look at the market, and we're still talking about this somehow. And I always wondered and never found a good answer, like, is there a business model for privacy? I've never seen anyone. I mean, you might have an incentive to do some side effects of privacy to avoid getting bad press, which is a good plan. But fundamentally, a company cannot really deliver something like Tor because it doesn't really make financially sense. And if it did, then you have a proprietary software, then you don't know if it's going to actually be secure, or maybe it happens like it happened with Skype. It was really, really amazing secure in the first year, and then somebody convinced eBay to buy it, even though there was no real business model there, but there was a reason for it to become an American software, and so it stopped being really secure. It was originally developed by some nice Estonian hackers who had privacy in their mind when they started. So we should learn from the Skype experience that things turn dark quite frequently. And I have a question to the DPAs in the room. What is I mean, you have focus catching businesses that are not compliant and things like that, but aren't you also influencing regulation, legislation? Is this something we can and should be talking about? I have a head full of ideas on things that we could regulate. And can we also talk about financing projects which are doing useful privacy tools, because they do not make sense if they're coming from the industry. We need them to come from science and from the hackers. I don't know exactly who else. From the users? From the people? Thank you.